Good evening. Welcome to Conspiracy Cafe. I'm your host, George Freund. We're with you now. We're with you to the end. And even though everybody tries to make the end come a little bit sooner, we're trying to do our best to push it back a little bit. And that's why you have to come to Conspiracy Cafe here on our home at that channel in downtown Toronto at Bay and Dundas, because that's the place to be. There is no other place to be. Some of the other places to be can be very difficult places to be. One of the big stories, it should be an earth-shaking story that mainstream media just really drops the ball on, because false flag terror is far more important than any other kind of real terror, is the Japanese Prime Minister has warned China that if they try to land on the disputed islands, Prime Minister Shinzo Abe says, we will use force to resist the Chinese. So here are these little specks of dust north of Taiwan, in the East China Sea, southwest of Okinawa. Tiny little godforsaken places that we could very well see the start of a protracted World War III come into place. Personally, based on the risks that may be involved, because both these cultures put a lot of emphasis on saving face. An ultimatum just doesn't do any good. The Japanese will have to save face and use force. The Chinese will have to save face and land. And then there may be a little bit of a squaring off. And due to all the treaties that we've signed that we said were no good after World War I, we just get a cascading effect where nation after nation after nation has to get enveloped into this situation, which could become very, very severe in a theater conflict or a world global conflict, because the United States is based in Okinawa. They could get into a shooting war very, very quickly. It's probably far more dangerous than the North Korean situation, because we have basically a puppet running a dictatorship in the North, a guy who's just not really all that experienced in foreign policy or driving a military unit, a large military force like the North Korean military is, but I'm sure he'll get a little help from his friends if the time comes, if the Chinese just descend over the border and into the Koreas, because once we get into a major regional conflict, that could happen very, very easily. That is real danger. All the things that have happened in the recent times here in Canada and in the United States are just street theater. It's just a mind game, a manipulation put on by corporate media. So the authorities will say something, it's taken as gospel, like Moses came down with a stone tablet, and it ends up in all the media assets in the region or on the planet Earth, depending on how big the story is. So here in Toronto, we're supposed to have had a very, very dangerous pair of desperados arrested by the RCMP because they plan to do some sort of terror activity to a via train. They said in their first news conference yesterday that the plot was not imminent. In fact, maybe it was just a rumor on the bathroom walls written somewhere. It was far from imminent. So there was really no grounds to take this as far as it is. It just didn't seem to make any sense, except for one small detail. The Canadian government is pushing their anti-terrorism bill back onto the front burner. So we get the 1-2 punch and that old classic saying, never let a good crisis go to waste. So we had a crisis in Boston. We'll manufacture a crisis here in Canada, and we'll show we're doing our job, and we'll enforce dictatorial police state power so that we can arrest on suspicion that perhaps you may commit a crime. And the greatest crime you can ever commit in the modern era is the Orwellian crime, the thought crime. You formed a thought. So maybe these two guys were bantering back and forth. In the bravado, young men may banter back and forth from time to time, and said some things in private that they had absolutely no idea were being monitored by 12 or 15 different police forces and intelligence agencies, who were taking every word they said, which may be in a language that is their second or possibly third language, and defining those words to the PhD level in their language. And that leaves much to be desired to be held to that kind of account. I'm sure if we took some of these fine officers to another country where they speak Urdu, and we held them to account for some of the words they used, they could be in the same situation. Put in a dank, dingy dungeon and slapped around a little bit because you said the wrong word. Maybe you were in North Korea and you said something that you thought was a word and you insulted the leader. How horrible for you to go from innocent tourist to dangerous criminal, insulting the very essence of the ruling family or Politburo. It can happen that easily. So I find it very hard to believe that these guys, the biggest thing we heard today is that one of them changed his itinerary. So instead of having the regular meeting or whatever they do, jihadist website, go to the mosque, jihadist website, go to the mosque, maybe they did something different. Yes, it was jihadist website, go look at some train tracks, go to the mosque. An imminent threat. No, it wasn't imminent, but it was a threat. It's just a classic application of the Hegelian dialectic, as all good Germans like to do, including our Führer, Herr Harper, to bring in, create a crisis, propose a solution. You already have the solution. It's to just take away more and more of our money, more and more of our freedoms. And what's coming down the road? We know it was in the budget. They're going to take all your private bank accounts for the bail-in. That's well on the horizon in the next few months. So it's far better to have this police state apparatus law in place just in case someone maybe would want to think some nasty thoughts about having all their money taken out of their bank accounts. Then we can have a preventive arrest. But by what the RCMP has done, we see they don't need that power. They had plenty of powers as it is right now to arrest these two individuals, probably very, very prematurely. But the fact that they've been under investigation for who knows how many years seems to be a complete and total waste of tax dollars. The railway have their own police forces. Canadian Pacific, CN, long-established police forces in Canada. The GO train service, they have their own special constable service. These properties are well protected. And if you know who they are and what they're doing, well, it doesn't take too much to, advise these constabularies about who these guys are. And when they get a train ticket, keep an eye on them. But if this is the best the so-called Al-Qaeda in Iran has, we probably don't have a whole lot to worry about. A good grandmother with a purse can probably deck those two out. The threat's over. But it's just a climate of fear that they're building up to use this crisis for as much as they can use it for. And it doesn't end here. It'll probably never end until it becomes an election platform to say, let's get into these false flag attacks. Let's start looking into national security and finding out what are we really talking about, and make that an election issue. Where is all the offshoring money going for various political leaders? Why do they need all these powers? When we start to look at Boston, it was like Larry, Curly, and Moe pulled off this operation. There are so many loose ends. It is beyond belief. And it's insulting and ludicrous to even think that someone who can count to 10 without using their fingers and or toes can't see through this. Historically, one of the great poems written by Edgar Allan Poe was called Tamerlane. Tamerlane is like a great warrior from the Genghis Khan era, 14th century, I believe. And he and his cohorts took over a large portion of the planet Earth. But when Edgar Allan Poe wrote this poem in 1827, he used a pseudonym. The pseudonym was, what could it possibly be? Take a guess. A Bostonian. So we look at this guy's, even from the beginning, his name is like a code word that's used in a military operation. We didn't blog much of this because the story was changing so quickly that whatever you wrote would be pretty much superseded within 4 or 5 hours. But we did post Webster Tarpley's book, Obama, the Postmodern Coup, which is just a textbook on how the Bush and the Obama administration have been courting Chechens for political purposes. And basically, the posted chapter is about Zbigniew Brzezinski and how he has been pathologically trying to poke Russia with a stick to create a bigger and better war, a global world war, to satisfy his hatred for Russia. Now that's something that doesn't get to be an election platform either. Usually we just nickel and dime small issues. Here we have a major player controlling presidential administrations. The guy who's like the founding father of the Trilateral Commission to a degree, telling us how to think. So he talks about what the Russians call the Brzezinski plan. The price of failing to implement my strategy is twofold. First, the U.S. will spur Russia and China, among others, to form a rival axis of power that could tip the world towards larger imperial wars. Second, it will antagonize the emerging populist rebellion against global inequality. This widening inequality is producing revolutionaries in waiting. The political awakening is now global in geographic scope, comprehensive in social scale. So this is kind of like a guy who's spilling gasoline all over the planet Earth and giving everybody matches to light. We don't need this. The ideas of inevitable war with Russia are now looming large in the pathological imagination of the corrupt and incompetent Anglo-American ruling elite. It has assured the proportions of a new twilight of the gods. Absurd charges about the Politkovskaya and Litvinenko assassinations. And then they jump to Max Hastings, we will have to fight Russia in this century. Well, I think we've burned that kind of philosophy up in many centuries past. And in the nuclear era, there's nowhere to go. It's like in the last Google code we worked on, we have to choose the path. The path we choose will determine how hot it's going to be from the radioactive fallout. So obviously there's one path we can't choose. War is no longer the path. The Trilateral Commission founder Brzezinski clan may be getting close to the nuclear button thanks to an Obama puppet presidency. Moscow General Yuri Baluyevsky, the Russian chief of staff, announced in January 2008 that Russia was now shifting its nuclear doctrine to include first use of nuclear weapons. Retired NATO generals are also coming to the same conclusion, the doctrine to frank reliance on the first use of nuclear weapons. General Avashov of Russia, former chief of staff, the collapse of the U.S. dollar was spurring the U.S. and NATO to court nuclear Armageddon. So we see on some of these other fronts in the world, that's the real meat and potatoes of what's going on. These twits in Boston, there isn't a whole lot they could ever do anywhere along the line. This is such a phony story. When we look at the issues here, you know, almost anything you read, even in the popular media, hundreds of police descend on suburb after dramatic standoff leaves one bombing suspect dead. So some of the little things we can pick out, there's no details how this guy escaped. So you're surrounded, there's 1,000 cops looking for you, at least, that they admit. That might even be just state and local as opposed to federal. And the guy just slips through. Well, how did that happen? I can hazard a guess. He probably had handlers. And he was in the back of their car, and it had blue flashing lights on top. Nobody looked in there. So seemingly there was an armed robbery at a 7-Eleven in Cambridge, Massachusetts that started all this stuff. An MIT campus police officer responds to a disturbance at the 7-Eleven, and he's shot and killed by people they say are these guys. There's only one small problem with that. In USA Today, the director of corporate communication at 7-Eleven says the surveillance video of the crime was not taken at a 7-Eleven that these guys were in. The suspect that robbed his store, and it was singular, not plural, didn't look anything like the guy. And I'd have to assume, because it's their store, they've seen the surveillance tape. So that means we've been lied to. But then we're lied to about everything. So this Tamerlane guy was supposed to have been rushed to hospital, Beth Israel Hospital. The doctors say he had too many gunshots to count. That's a lot. But it can't be infinity. It's probably less than 1,000. Maybe it's more than 10. But they usually count. So why would you get a response like that there were too many to count? Now, we don't know for sure if we're dealing with this as a real scenario, that Tamerlane is the person that's in the videos that are going around, or images. The Tamerlane death photo. Let's see, we can whip that up here. So this is supposed to be a picture of his body, although it's in the inverse. It's supposed to be from the other side. Well, there's, I counted 2 bullet holes. But maybe the doctor don't have too many fingers and toes. Giant gaping wound here in the side. And then there's other stories coming out that he wasn't even run over. They said he was run over by his brother. But that's not true. Doctors at the hospital were saying, no, there were no tire marks on him. There was no marks on his body to imply that he was run over by a car at all. And then we have a witness who called into a radio show in Boston, who said she saw things, and what she saw was he was run over by the police.
Good morning, Linda. How are you? John, Jerry, and Kirk with you.
Oh, it's been a long night.
I'll bet it has. You live on Dexter Street, correct?
My boyfriend does, but I was just spending the night.
Okay, and tell us what happened. Give us the timeline, what you saw.
We rushed to the front of the house. It's a 2-family house, and into his roommate's room, where we saw the first suspect get hit by a police SUV, and then after he was hit, shot multiple times. Minutes later, an ambulance had arrived, put the suspect into the ambulance, and then off.
And did you say that the suspect was hit by a police SUV? In other words, a vehicle hit him first?
Correct.
Wow.
I can also say, from what we saw early this morning, I'd be hard-pressed to think that he was actually pronounced dead at the hospital. I mean, from the injuries that he incurred in the street, I would say he was probably dead when he was put in the ambulance.
Now, Linda, did he have a weapon? Was he firing back with a pistol or some sort of a weapon at the police?
Well, so with the gunfire that you hear, and even if you listen to the news, you'll hear, gunfire it sounds just from one gun, but towards the end you could hear multiple rounds, which sounds like it's coming from 2 different weapons. Mm-hmm. Did I see it? I did not see him fire. I just remember him, I just remember seeing him get shot multiple times. I mean, just from what I can remember and from what I can hear, I believe towards the end there was some retaliation on his end, but I didn't personally see it.
You haven't heard any gunfire explosions lately, correct? It's been a while. We
have not. There have been reports on the news stating that that they may have found potential pipe bombs that they were going to safely detonate. I personally haven't heard any explosions. I can tell you there are 2, there's the Boston bomb squad truck as well as the Boston Police Department Special Forces truck in front. So, they're definitely taking precautions, but I haven't heard anything else detonate.
Linda, thank you very much.
Okay, so we heard from Linda. And we heard from Linda, and she's was a witness. She saw what was going on, and she made it quite plain that Tamerlane was run over by the police, which isn't all that surprising considering they were supposed to be in a gunfight where 200 rounds were fired in their general direction. But why do we have to lie? It's not necessary. We get all these stories, like they base everything they say on a previous lie. And then the next lie, and the next lie, and the next lie. Lies here in the United States, lies in Russia. So the big thing is because, he's affiliated with Chechnya, they get into all the Chechnya lies. So they talk about, the raid at the movie theater, which was pretty much done by the Russian FSB, if anybody had to say anything. The 2004 Beslan school massacre. I remember that one very well. I did a lot of work on that one. I remember the Speaker of the Russian Parliament saying that it was carried out by a foreign intelligence agency. And then you got to look at the short list of all the intelligence agencies. We'll just pick countries. We don't have to pick just the individual intelligence agencies. Who could possibly have the cojones to go into Russia, pull a stunt like that, and flex on the beach and get away with it? Liechtenstein? I doubt it. Sweden? I don't think so. France? Germany? Italy? I doubt it. How about the United States? Is probably the only one who could get away with something like that. And things happened after Beslan that were very, very peculiar. The Russian Navy took to sea. They assembled off Iceland, which is the launch point to take out NATO, Europe and North America. And there was a major crisis on the ocean. And that was never reported by mainstream media. Fortunately for me, I was reading an Icelandic newspaper at the time, and I read about a Russian ship foundering with, men in lifeboats lost at sea. And I'm going, well, I've never heard about that. Then I heard about a great Canadian naval story. One of our submarines left England, caught fire for some mysterious reason. A sailor was killed. The ship was disabled. An American nuclear attack submarine had to pass it by and go to Iceland. Well, while the ship's on fire, men are dying. Okay, we do tiered response like in the emergency services. Which one do you do first? Well, you'd go to the sinking ship that's on fire. But something was more important than a sinking ship on fire. The sailors on HMCS Chicoutimi reported giant fireballs going down the companionways. Something almost like a scalar weapon hit it. What would the Russians think when they see something leaving a British port that looks like a British submarine? It's a British submarine coming to get me. We take it out. Things were getting very, very hairy off Iceland. And then everybody just went back to sleep, and somehow somebody somewhere kissed and made up. We also have to remember that day. Remember that day? George Bush wasn't doing too well with all his wars, having trouble fighting terrorists. He was at the Republican National Convention. Things weren't going too well. And then Beslan happened. And then he strutted out onto the stage and going, hey, you let me get them terrorists, baby. I'll fix the world. Who could that intelligence agency come from? What country? It would have to be the United States. And a Speaker of the Russian Parliament was right. Some of the newspapers leave out one of the other big Chechen things that they got caught at in 1999, the apartment bombings. Because the local police caught the Russian intelligence service, the FSB, planting the bombs. But it was just a drill. Sorry, we forgot to tell you. And then for some strange reason, all these apartment building bombings just stopped. So we see it was just lie on top of lie on top of lie on top of lie. And now we have, lies in the American side as well. Lie on top of lie on top of lie. Everything's based on the previous terror event, which was manufactured. So then we find out, as the story progressed, that these individuals were under observation for 5 years. So if you're under observation for 5 years, like the family, the mother and stuff like that, say that, all their emails are monitored, their communications are monitored, maybe they're even physically surveilled from time to time. There has to be a point in time to say, well, he's going to the dynamite store, or, he's buying this or that, or he's got 50 pressure cookers in his basement. There has to be a point in time where, you cross the line to say, I think we got a hot potato here. But it never happened. It's like they are being surveilled, but it's like they're being handled. massaged by certain elements in the intelligence services. There's little doubt that you can have about that. So some of the agents, they say in an article here, are having quiet discussion about things like that. Who was watching them, for how long and why, and how come they screwed up. And then they got a tip. Not just that the Russians called them and said, got them. They're terrorists. They're going to pull a stunt. They get an inside tip that something's going on. And really, nothing happens. When he's at the marathon, he tweets out weird things. So if he's under surveillance and you get some of these weird tweets coming out, it's got to be like a major attention getter that something's going on. So from the marathon he says, it isn't a safe place to smoke. Which is kind of weird. But after the alleged bombings, they go out and party. And they just participate in their typical, young, gratuitous lifestyle with no problems. But at the same time, they keep trying to tell us that Tamerlane didn't have any friends. He was isolated and alone. But you see pictures of him, at the boxing ring, foxy boxing with some gorgeous chick, and he's married, he's got a kid. He seems to be a very popular young man. He's quite handsome. His brother's got quite a collage of friends to smoke dope with and go around with. So that's not true. That's another lie. So basically it looks like pretty much everything they have, they're just making up. One of the bloggers has come out with the fact that the younger Saranov was actually leaving the scene of the bombing with his backpack on. So in April 21st, 2012, he wrote, "I will perish young." He tweeted, "Never underestimate the rebel with a cause." July 17th post, "Third zombie apocalypse dream in a span of like 2 weeks. I'm no golden boy, but maybe, just maybe, we should be expecting something soon." Then they bring out a whole new genre of the way conspiracies looked at, because he thought 9/11 was an inside job. So they come up with, the word denier. He's a denier. His mother was a denier, like Holocaust denier. Then they said he posted hateful comments talking about the suicide rate of American soldiers. Active duty American soldiers have an all-time high of suicide rates. How's that hateful? That's a fact. In fact, it's such a fact that it's a shame we can't do something about that. So he even posted a YouTube site dedicated to terrorism. So he's under observation for 5 years. You get tips from Russian security. You got inside tips. He's got his YouTube site devoted to terrorism. And they can't figure it out. But they need more power. I'd have to think that maybe what we need are more brains. Maybe we shouldn't be hiring all our officers for brawn. We should hire a few that are critical thinkers. It could probably save a lot of lives. And then they say, there's long-held claims by Russia that the insurgents in the Caucasus, people they started a war with, admittedly it's like a civil war because Chechnya wanted out, and the Russians said, "Niet," and a horrible war started. Back in the 90s, Grozny was, the place to talk about when it came to horrible, horrible things. It was a very, very sad state of affairs. I know it was TVO, I think, aired a BBC program on that war. It was just despicable. It's one of those things you watch you can never forget. The Russians wouldn't let the BBC reporters into the village that they were attacking. They couldn't get in for a couple of few days after it was over. So what the Russians did is they just went house to house, unlike the Americans where they kicked in the doors of people in and around Boston. No warrant, just knock on the door, you know, everybody out. You take them all out one at a time, high-risk takedown. You didn't do nothing. You just lived in Boston. And you answered the door. I guess if you didn't answer the door, they'd throw in some flashbang grenades and shoot you. But that's the state of the world in the New World Order. But the Russians, what they did is you huddled in the basement, they poured in gasoline and burned you alive. And then the place where they took statements, you just see this bare brick wall and blood stains going down the side from where they tortured people to death. So they're masters at it too. And then they had a lot of trouble finding these guys. Can we get a shot here, my friend? What could possibly make you think that these people have anything to do with terrorism? So you have these young kids going around. These aren't the Sarnov brothers. These were some of their friends. So the younger Sarnov has pictures posted of this BMW, high-end BMW, 330xi, way out of my price range, with stickers on the back about FU and other F things. And this is his University of Dartmouth license plate on the front, Terrorista #1. So these guys actually harbored the so-called terrorists. When they're hauled away, it's, you know, huggy, kissy, okay, throw on the cuffs, let's go, we're taking you downtown. None of this, you know, 20 SWAT guys, machine guns in your face, slapping you around, silly. Seemed to be a, you know, a rather sedate thing. These guys don't even have their weapons in their hand. But they were friends of the guy. And there's our buddy tweeting pictures of himself with the car, Terrorista #1. Now, how could you ever find that? Could you know, we got to have more powers for the FBI or something like that. How could, you know, guys driving down the street. He's got a guy in his car that's on a watch list from the FBI. He's got a license plate that says terrorist. The guy in the car runs a terrorist YouTube site. How could you ever figure that out? Maybe they got a, you know, string grenades from the back. Just like you do when you get married, you got tin cans, right? You got like 50 grenades hanging from the back. Light a few off once in a while and give them the idea, hey, maybe that guy's a terrorist. So they say, you know, they talk about how these guys went away for a while. And then, while this story's going live, reporters are there. 2 Russian-speaking men show up in their early 20s. And they tell people they're journalists for the Boston Globe. Like, there's a good story. My name is Boris. I am a journalist with the Boston Globe. More vodka, please. Like, you know, hello? So the reporters got suspicious. They call the Boston Globe. They're not the slightest bit interested in hearing that there's people impersonating Boston Globe reporters. They go to the back. They find an open door, force their way in. They go inside. And then now all of a sudden they're not reporters anymore. Oh, we're friends of these people. And they close the door. Sounds like they're Russian agents. Sounds like they're Russian agents. Big time. So then, of course, you know, we go through the pictures of the real bombers, or the closest facsimile thereof. These guys from Kraft International, as they're identified, if they're not Navy SEALs. The guys who were standing right beside where the bomb went off, like it was just a little bit here to the right. They have all the paraphernalia of the Navy SEALs skull that you see on this uniform here. And they have the backpack that has the mark on it, the little square that they found blown up in the street. So you just look at all these little anomalies, and you just wonder, isn't there anybody that works for, like, you know, a big media organization that doesn't see this? Here's a picture of these guys in a larger context, where you see them here in the crowd, and you see this screen. Like, they weren't filming in here when the marathon was going on. They're filming outside, so you couldn't see in. So you had no idea what was really going on the inside. until after they came in and ripped the screen down. So the guys in the fancy suits were standing here. The bomb blew up here. They ended up there. Looks like they were in charge, having some kind of control mechanism, perhaps. They got big backpacks, too. And then this big Suburban comes in, loaded with communications equipment or something like that, with more of these contractor-type guys or SEAL-type guys in the suits. They start taking apart pieces of the stand across the street for whatever reason. An FBI bomb truck comes in. They're in communication with an agent that comes out wearing an FBI bulletproof vest. And then they just disappear into the wilderness. It's just absolutely amazing. Can we show the 55-second video of Tamerlane?
Yep.
So this is supposed to be Tamerlane under arrest, coming back to the police cars. Doesn't look like he's got more bullet holes in him than you can count. Of course, the police say this isn't Tamerlane, it's someone else. So they strip everybody naked in the street and march him down to the car. He does, you know, have some striking resemblance to the guy, but I guess we all look alike. Especially if you're in California and your name's Dorner and they're blowing people away. That's one thing we give at least the Boston cops a little bit of credit for, is, you know, they didn't kill a whole bunch of innocent people or shoot them up looking for somebody. That's a start. There's worry about, you know, whether this will affect relations with Russia. That could be important. Here's the name of the doctor who was at the emergency department, Dr. Richard Wolf. He did not see any obvious injuries that would back up the theory of the guy being run over by his brother. And I imagine, being in charge of the emergency department, he's seen a few of those. Chechen rebel leaders, you know, have nothing to do with this guy. They don't see anything about him at all that implies that he's a leader. Another British article, was a Boston bomber inspired by Russia's bin Laden? So they talk to these people, and they say flat out, he's not one of ours. They said, you know, he was in your country. You raised him. So they say that, you know, they told his mother that the FBI said that he was a really dangerous extremist leader. They were afraid of him. And she says, no, he was controlled by the FBI for 5 years. That he had direct contact with Islamic militants. Or maybe the FSB in Russia. He was inspired by, you know, this Russian bin Laden. So this seems to be, you know, other stuff that's all made up. One of the things that does come out in the article is they bring up the brainwash thing. Was he brainwashed by his brother, or he brainwashed by a lot of other people? He's also being alleged today to, at least the older one, Tamerlane, to have been involved in a series of murders, a triple homicide, where 3 of his, well, at least 1 friend and 2 associates had their throats slit. And I guess we have to look at Mr. Tamerlane as being on the short list, to say the least. When this happens, he sends out his last message on Facebook. Well, he's, you know, in the boat or something like that. He tells his father this will be his last message before the police get me. I haven't done it. They set me up. I'm sorry for all this. So today they're saying, you know, he's confessed, but he can't talk. So I'm sure they just do like they do in a Mexican jail. They write your confession in a language you don't understand, break all your fingers, sign it for you, and say that's yours. That seems to be the way the world works, unfortunately, to a great extent. So then we have to look at some of the pictures of the actual bombing. And I reviewed these with a friend of mine who's got a lot of experience as a nurse. Okay, doctor. And The first time I saw these pictures, I thought it was fake. And I hate to be cruel or this or that, but, you know, I've seen blood splat all over the place. It's a liquid. It's like water. It's like water with lots of food coloring in it. It runs like water. You spill it on the ground, it moves. It's very slippery. And when I saw this, big schmear here, the first thing that came to mind for me is that's paint. Same when you step in it, it's not a really deep, dark color like that. Like I say, it's more like going into water. And when you see the really bright red in this image, I'm thinking again, paint. And so does my medical professional friend. And then the other thing is, you look at this wound where the guy's got, supposed to have the lower part of his leg blown off or something like that. Now when you start cutting major arteries in the legs, like they shoot. It's like a hose. The stuff just comes out, man, and under high pressure. So that stuff's going to be blasting, 10, 15 feet. No problem. Each body is going to carry about 5 liters of blood. The other thing is the guy with no legs is, he's the most seriously injured person there. It's a double amputation or something like that, and, he's going to die fast unless action is taken. And no action is taken. What they do is they take out this lady, who's not hurt nearly as bad. And I like that one from the first time I saw it. Firehouse Subs, well done. It's almost like a little hidden message there or something like that. But she was in front of the guy with no legs at the beginning. She's lying here. This guy looks like he's just, taking it easy, chilling. A lot of people don't seem to be acting and reacting properly at the time. One of the biggest things that's missing is when you lose blood, you go into shock and you get very, very pale. And you're going to get very, very pale very fast because you're looking at yourself all blown up too. So you're going to get very weak in the stomach, you get lightheaded, and you're going to go into shock. And there isn't anybody in there that's in shock. Their faces don't show it. Then there's the funny thing about the man with the legs. Let's switch to another thing. So here's the guy once they got him in a wheelchair. And then that looks like the same guy who was a Afghanistan war vet who lost his legs in the war. Like, they're not twins. They're as close as damn is to swearing. So because he doesn't have any legs, well, it's easy to attach something under the tourniquet to make it look like we have some kind of prosthetic wound there. And he's still not bleeding. Wasn't bleeding before the tourniquet was put on. He's not bleeding afterwards. And then there's something important too. He's not in shock. He's dirty. His face is all dirty, but he's not in shock. And they got him in a wheelchair. He's definitely a stretcher case. There's no way he could hold himself up or support himself. He should have lost 1.5 liters, 2 liters of blood. He should just be a stretcher case and a stretcher case only. And he does look like a guy who they say is Nick Voigt, U.S. Army officer, lost his legs in Kandahar. And I'd have to say, even though this is from Snopes as a denier, to say that it's not true, I believe it. They did this massive psychological operation on us too. At the baseball game, it's just mom and apple pie and, chanting mantras and all that, like you're going away for a cult weekend or something like that. It's just like Orwell's Couple of Minutes of Hate. And then WBZ Radio was listening to that live over the preceding days. When it was over, they came up with this, maybe it's on YouTube somewhere, but it's like an infomercial about what happened, how strong Boston is, interspaced with comments from political leaders like Obama, the police commissioner, the governor, interspersed. It was like the most fantastic example of a mind control thing that I've ever heard of in my life. It was absolutely amazing. And, we go on. The only comment I heard from anyone who made sense, and it had to be from a Russian guy, of course, Russian Alpha Special Forces team veteran, vice president of the International Association of Intelligence Officers for them, Alexei Filatov. He says there's more to this case than meets the eye. Firstly, that the origin and religious beliefs of the suspect, along with the specifics of the bombing, have all been carefully premeditated and planned by someone within the United States in order to distract the public from the true identity and long-term aims of the actual planners. Putting a young Chechen in those shoes was a top-notch professionalism in distracting everyone from the true identity and motives of the planner, he told Russian television. The executors were chosen to confuse the American public and simultaneously untie the White House hands in a way that would justify a departure from the rhetoric of non-involvement in military action on foreign territories. Brilliant. Brilliant. That was the only thing that anybody said that made sense. There's some other things that make sense. This article, FBI casting set stage for Boston Marathon bombing shootout charade. So this guy comes up with other names. There's another article about that there was a sleeper cell of 12. Well, the Terrorista #1 car takes care of a few. But this guy came up with names. Missing Brown University student Sunil Tripathi and Mike Mulugeti. So at first, articles were coming out, Boston Marathon bombing, Indian origin, Sunil Tripathi, one of the alleged suspects. Well, somehow, corporate media dropped that ball. There was supposed to be a guy coming into court, and they closed the courthouse down. And he disappeared and was never heard from in any way, shape, or form. The article gets into something, too, that I never heard about in the first World Trade Center bombing, is because this article goes into how the FBI just makes up their own guys and massages them into positions of doing stuff. And one of them was an individual, an FBI informant for the 1993 World Trade Center bombing. And he was giving them the real deal so that they could do something to prevent it. His name was Imad A. Salim. Never heard of him before. In an article, tapes depict proposal to thwart bomb used in the Trade Center blast. So he started recording everything the FBI were talking to him about. Good man. Then we get into some of the real meat. The only person who was really flagging this guy and his family was his uncle. Uncle Ruslan Sarni of Montgomery Village, Maryland. So somebody did a really good investigative report on who this turkey is. And wouldn't you be surprised to say that he's probably CIA? See, back in the 90s, he was working for the Agency for International Development, the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, in Kazakhstan, in the Wild West days, they called them. He has a checkered business career. He's a law school graduate from Duke University. USAID is the primary cover, or one of the primary covers for CIA agents in the field. He's a well-connected oil executive, involved in international criminal investigation into a Kazakh billionaire banker turned fugitive, alleged to have absconded with $6 billion from Kazakhstan's BTA Bank. Now I think we know why the boys have a BMW 330xi and why they're untouchables. Everybody'd like to get a piece of that $6 billion, I'm sure. He was also involved in the purchase of Prince Andrew's estate in England when it was sold. They paid $5 million more than the asking price to get this home for one of these other Kazakh billionaires. And when they party well. We don't have too much time to get into that. So with an oligarch called Kukabayev, they use money laundered through a network of offshore companies to attempt to hide the purchases of Prince Andrew's place. Another billionaire oligarch, Mukhtar Ablyazov, is also involved with these people. So he's been a lawyer, since he is a lawyer, in Kazakh affairs. In a statement Ruslan Sarny gave in high court in December, Kubilyev bought Sunning Hill and properties in Mayfair with $96 million derived from a complex series of deals intended to disguise money laundering. The money came from takeovers of Western companies. One of the companies involved with this man was Big Sky Energy Corporation, where he was a top executive. He used to be known as China Energy Ventures Corporation, now bankrupt U.S. oil company run by S.A. Al Sheyuzavagarlu or something like that. He's also a long-term executive at Halliburton. Everybody knows Halliburton. So here's this guy and his kids. They're the untouchables. Who would you know, if Uncle CIA goes, hey, Dad, I need a summer job. Want to be a CIA operative? We're going to pull a real boner on the Americans. I get you in right at the front line. You just got to walk around the Olympics and look cool, and we'll look after everything else. But something went wrong. Something went horribly wrong. And maybe they became vulnerable assets that had to be taken out. Maybe they really did kill them both, kill one of them and put the other one in hospital where he'll spend the rest of his life in prison if they don't execute him, because dead men tell no tales, especially when you're talking $6 billion. Then there's this dude. He was the guy we told you about at the very beginning, who was arrested by an American at the marathon. Abdul Rahman Ali Al-Harbi, a Saudi national. The Ali Al-Harabi name is just renowned in terrorism. One of our faithful followers sent me a list. There's 6 of them on the top Al-Qaeda list, and 4 of them in Guantanamo. And this guy who's on a terrorism watch list. And he got tackled to the ground. He's smoking, as in not smoking cigarettes, smoking on fire. Smells of stuff that blew up. And he's asking about the second bomb and how many people got killed. We would call that inside knowledge almost anywhere else. So he was supposed to be deported. Whether they're following through with that or not is unknown. Under Section 2123b. Security and related grounds, terrorist activities. Terrorist activities. Homeland Security Secretary Janet Napolitano refused to answer questions about anything to do with him. He's in custody, but they say he's in no way connected with the bombings. He's supposed to be a witness. But he's on a terrorist watch list. He goes to school, he's on a student visa in Findlay, Ohio, but he lives in an apartment in Boston. That's a long-distance commute, I'm pretty sure. The investigation can no longer be discussed. Secretary of State John Kerry met with his Saudi Foreign Minister Saud on Tuesday, and the FBI began backtracking on this guy. President Obama had a chance encounter too with Saudi Foreign Minister Saud and Saudi Ambassador Abdel Al-Jaber. And then all of a sudden, things just started to slide backwards a little bit. They may even revoke the deportation order. And then, like anybody in law enforcement says, who could do that? Would have to be the president or somebody very high up in the State Department. It sure isn't going to be the guys on the bottom who do the work. Then Tamerlane is said to have taken a 6-month sojourn to Russia in 2012. So the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, Representative Mike Rogers, a Republican from Michigan, former FBI agent, brings some of this up, says it's extremely important. that maybe there was like a radicalization, that he received training in terrorist techniques. So they asked for help from foreign intelligence agencies like Russians, and they don't get any, he says. Senator Lindsey Graham just pretty much says, you know, we have to treat these people as enemy combatants, flush the Constitution, forget about people being citizens. He says either our laws are insufficient or the FBI failed. We're at war with radical Islamists. We need to up our game. And then we have to look back in a historical perspective about these trips to Russia. Remember way back, probably before a lot of you were born, a certain guy who was alleged to have assassinated the President of the United States. He took a long trip to Russia. Then he came back and they said he shot the President. And a lot of people say he was a patsy, that it was all set up. Maybe it was. But we have to wonder, in a post-9/11 world, I got to ask you, how the hell do you get on the airplane? You're on a terrorist watch list. The Russians reported you. And you can get on planes in either country with no problems at all. Then they even say he was even using an alias. I find that hard to believe. There were other arrests. It said in this newspaper article, Boston bombers, FBI hunting 12-strong terrorist sleeper cell. So there was an arrest of a man and 2 women 60 miles from Boston hours before Zokar's capture. Of course, they're not identified. And then something that came out while we were looking over the scanner traffic in Massachusetts at the time. You can listen live on the internet to the police scanners around the United States, and they give descriptions and synopsis of some of the things going on. On April the 19th at 7:27 and 7 o'clock, we have a special operations unit 4 involved in something. Ordnance located inside a taxi cab. 2 to 3 suspects in custody. Scene very active. Special Operations 4. Pipe bomb located. Bomb squad detonating. Same area closed off. Didn't see that in the newspapers. And then Alex Jones brings out this bombing is diverting attention from a lot of things that are going on. One of them was war crimes trials against George W. Bush and Barack Obama for ordering ongoing torture in camps all over the world. Didn't get into some of the other details. Little tiny tidbits that we'll end with, I guess. U.S. Senate. We will back Israel on attacks on Iran. Just so you can help get that world war after the economy collapses. The U.S. Senate declares the entire USA to be a battleground. There's no mistake after you look about some of the things going on. The vote passed 93-7. It wasn't on the evening news. And then from a counter, and Police Chief Mark Kessler from Gilberton, Pennsylvania, is establishing a Constitution Security Force. It's going to expand to 38 chapters, each in a different state, so that I guess we have a Department of Homeland Security to counter the Department of Homeland Security. Maybe they'll be the rebels in the Civil War. Things are moving at a breakneck pace. We haven't even got into the financial stuff. Maybe we'll have to play with that on my weekend or something like that to put together a little few pieces on that, because it's not looking good either. So when they started talking about they need a nuclear reaction to the collapse of the dollar, it may not be very far off. Might not be very far off. We might be in a downward spiral, a depressionary spiral right as we speak. There was a tweet that the White House was attacked and Obama was wounded. The stock market just started to cave. We may be being attacked by hackers from other countries to put out false messages in a conflict that could arise very, very quickly as the situation deteriorates. It's difficult to say. A lot of things are difficult to say because you don't get all the knowledge you need. There's one place you can come to get it. You come to Conspiracy Cafe, you come to that channel, it helps. And I'll tell you, I'll be very frank, we're bankrupted in our bank account for this show because we had to pay for our website and transferring internet and all that kind of stuff, so our most generous donations that have come in have already been used up very, very quickly. So if you can hit the donate button to keep this afloat, or leave something under a rock in a strategic place that we can find, we would appreciate that very much. Everything's being taken away from us, and it's being taken away fast. And there's only one thin edge of the wedge to fight back. Us. We do it very, very well. The Google Doodle we didn't touch. It looked like Antarctica. Looked like maybe one of those end-of-the-world visions. The Inner Earth. That was the one for Earth Day. It didn't get around that much, but that was our quick Reader's Digest look at it. Anyway, we appreciate you for coming out, giving us all the help you can. The lives we save may be our own. Tune in to Conspiracy Cafe anytime you can, because this is where it's at, baby. There is no other on the planet Earth. Thank you, Hugh, for doing a fine job. Good night, and we'll see you next time. Bye.